Hey folks, it's Nick and Carrie from Bootstrap Farmer, and in this video we're going to talk about the hows and the whys of up-potting and the Bootstrap Farmer lineup of pots.
Most gardeners tend to up-pot in the spring and early summer when their plants are going through a vigorous growth.
So the best example of up-potting is a tomato plant. So if you wanted to go to the market or harvest as much tomatoes as you could throughout the season, you're going to want to start that seed as early as possible. That means that you can grow out the tomato plant indoors in the perfect temperature as winter is going on outside. During the last frost date, you can move that plant outside and you already have fruit, you already have flowers, it's a well-established root system, and it's ready to go.
All that being said, when you start your seeds smaller and can up-pot, you can have more control over the temperature when you start your plants indoors. So if you get a late cold snap, you've got your plants indoors, they're protected from that. You can't control the weather.
So the other time temperature comes into play is whenever we're transplanting the plants and trying to avoid transplant shock. So keep in mind in the early spring, whenever you're planting out, that the ground is most likely going to be a little bit colder than what the plant is used to inside. And so if we have up-potted, we've given that root ball a little bit of insulation through bigger soil. Also, there's way more roots than if you just took a single seedling and either planted it directly into the ground or moved it from a single cell of a cell tray insert. And so once we move that up the line, you have a way bigger root ball to go into the ground.
When you start your seeds in a smaller cell tray, once you're ready to up-pot, you can use your space better by picking out the plants that aren't doing so great and only moving the plants that are doing really well that will survive up-potting.
Up-potting also allows you to extend the season. So by planting seeds early en masse like this, you can start transplanting of different head lettuces and kale and Asian greens and any type of bunching greens that you might be planting. So if you had successions of, hey, it's the last frost date, we're moving them outside to grow out, then you have all these rows of plants coming right behind them that's fully grown out, and you don't have any weird lag. So every single week that you plant, it's nice and consistent, and you're doing that inside and reintroducing it back outside.
As the plant grows, its root system expands, and a larger pot allows for these roots to spread out, preventing overcrowding and encouraging a healthier growth.
Another benefit to up-potting is replenishing the nutrients that are uptaken from a smaller seed cell. So this is a good example right here of a little bit of yellowing. We're very hard on our plants here at Bootstrap Farmer, so this one was left in the pot way too long. It's showing signs of stress because all of the nutrients have already been depleted out of this little container. So if we were to plant it up, using that same root ball, cleaning it out a little bit, replenishing it with fresh soil, introduces new foods and new nutrients to that plant, and the further up down the line we go, you can see the different stages of growth. Another thing that happens is at Bootstrap Farmer, we talk a lot about an expanded growing zone and buffers. One buffer that up-potting allows is water management. And so a little tiny plant like this, once it's watered, it's going to stay soaking wet. So here's an example of something that has way too much water in it. As we move this into the different up-pots, it gives us more buffer of soil. So if we overwater it, it lets it drain out a little bit. If we underwater it, it can take up a little bit more moisture, hold a little bit more as those roots grow out. So it really doesn't matter if you stick a seed in a giant pot and water the whole thing. There's nothing for the roots to uptake. But as we're moving them through different pots, the more the roots grow out, the more they're reaching for water and the more of a buffer that you need.
The health of the plant suffers when it becomes root-bound, and their roots form a dense network that impedes their ability to absorb nutrients and water. Up-potting prevents this by providing ample space for the roots to grow more freely.
Another benefit to up-potting is once a cell tray is kind of grown out at this point, not only is it getting root-bound, but all these leaves are restricting airflow. That means that you have the potential for little wet spots and mold to grow. Gnats like to get in this wet environment and kind of move about. So you need air moving through here to kind of help and mitigate all that stuff. If you take one tray that has 72 slots in it and move it up to a 32 cell tray, that means all of these plants have a little bit more room spread out, and as airflow is coming in, all that air is keeping away all the gnats, all the moisture. As those grow out, you can move it to 3.3-inch pots, which give you even more room, 18 per tray instead of 32. And then things like peppers and cucumbers and tomatoes, you can move up to a 5-inch pot to give yourself even more room. So as they grow up tall, leaves are getting bigger, stems are getting wider, but it's still enough room for that airflow to come through. All right, so now that you have kind of seen the progression of up potting, let's talk about some best practices. Number one, what pot size are you going to pick? This right here is mixed lettuce greens that's going to be cut at the baby lettuce stage. So me personally, I would skip the 2.5 because that's very similar to it, and we know that this is going to be a fast growing plant, and move it either right into a 3.3 or a 5-inch pot, because we know that we can let this sit, and here in about 4 weeks this will be ready to harvest under ideal conditions. Now if we had something like rosemary or thyme, something that's going to be a woody, stemmy thing, I would go ahead and put it into this 2.5-inch cup, because that's plenty of room to double the size of the plant and move it up through the progression because it grows much slower. So the next tip I want to give you is how to actually remove plants from the cell trays. A lot of people make this really hard, but all you have to do is give it a nice water 12 to 24 hours beforehand. That's really the key. A lot of people try to take them out when they're too dry, and when stuff is dry, it crumbles. Whenever it's too wet, same thing. You have all this nasty stuff that it's not holding and binding. It has to be just exactly perfect. So the thing they have to do is just lift this up, give it a little squeeze. I go ahead and pull it off by the stem. In case some of this dirt flicks off, you still have that stem. All the roots are still intact, and this is an ideal transplant to go ahead and up pot. We just pulled this out of water. It's a little bit wet. Still give it a squeeze. Still by the stem. It's still fine, but the difference between this one and this one watered the day before, hardly any water comes out. It's much more stable plug. Okay, so this is a rosemary plant that we bought at the nursery a couple of days ago. This probably is not an ideal candidate to be transplanted just yet, but I wanted to use an example of root pruning. So as I pull this out, it's a little dry, and you have all these extra roots. Now, some plants and some rules of thumb is going to tell you to go ahead and break those off and to promote new growth. I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on this unless you're doing something like a house plant, maybe an orchid, something that's a little bit bigger, a little bit more long-term. Vegetable crops, I would not spend a whole lot of time doing this. Something like this, more of an investment because of the woody stem and how long it's going to be transplanted. It's not going to hurt to pull anything off. It's also a good example that as you're transplanting and moving things out of cell trays, dirt's going to fall off, you're going to lose a couple of roots, you're going to be just fine. Slap it into the next pot, and be good to go. All right, so before you transplant, you're going to want to prepare a pot. We have this nice cocoa core with a little bit of compost mixed in. It's been watered in, not wet, not too dry. Nice consistency. You can ball it up. It's not going to totally fall apart. I'm going to take any of these pots, and some people see a hole this big and are like, hey, the soil's going to fall through. It's really not a big deal. Because of the moisture content of this pot, I like to fill it in about halfway. When we get to where we know we're going to transplant something out of it, I like to take the pot that we're transferring from, slide it in there, fill in the edges, really try to get as much soil in there as possible without it. You're going to learn that as you farm and as you garden, that you're going to just have a feel for things. Don't worry about doing it wrong the first time. Get it nice and compact, and then you can remove the pot, and that's going to leave a void. So you can take your transplant, just like the cell plot, give it a squeeze, slide that guy in there, compress it a little bit. Sometimes you may have to add a little soil, sometimes not. You don't want to fill that all the way to the brim. You want a little moat around there. And that's ready to go.
After you've up potted, one important thing you want to do is make sure you water your plant. That gives the soil time to settle with the roots and start to settle into its new home. After you let your plant rest, you just want to continue to monitor it. Make sure there's no transplant shock going on. It's not wilting. Just keep an eye on it and then resume care as normal. One of the most common problems after up potting is overwatering. So just keep an eye on it visually to make sure there's not a lot of water draining out the bottom. Feel of your soil, make sure it's not just dripping wet. And then continue your care as usual.
So the other thing to look at whenever uppotting is the plant ready to be uppotted? Again, we used this example earlier, the yellow leaves, it looks kind of sickly. If we decided to save this plant instead of compost it, this is a prime candidate to get some new soil around it and to get a little bit more nutrient after we take the dead leaves off. The next thing we can do is take a look at the size of the plant. This one right here and this one right here were in the same two pots a couple of days ago. Nice and long, nice and long. This for sure needs a little bit more room to grow, as the mint did a couple of days ago when we were getting ready to shoot this video. The frequency of uppotting can vary greatly depending on the plant, its growth rate, and its specific needs. Here's some guidelines for different kinds of plants. Fast-growing vegetable plants like tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini must be uppotted more frequently, typically every 2 to 3 weeks, as they grow quickly, and these plants tend to outgrow their containers rapidly and require more space and nutrients. Other vegetables that benefit from uppotting include beans, corns, carrots, radish, spinach. All can be started directly from seeds in the container before the first frost dates and moved to larger pots and then planted out in the field. Lettuce, herbs, peppers, eggplants, squash, and radishes are also known to thrive when uppotted, especially for gardeners with limited ground space for traditional gardens. And finally, the cabbage family, including cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts, can benefit from being planted a couple of inches deeper than they were in the original pot for uppotting. Slower growing plants, like bonsais and succulents, may only need to be uppotted once every 1 to 2 years. These plants grow much slower and can handle being a little root bound. Indoor plants must be potted every 12 to 18 months. However, this can vary based on the plant's growth rate and size of its current pot. Perennial plants must often be uppotted every 2 to 3 years. Over time, these plants can become root bound in their containers and will benefit from the additional space and fresh soil that comes with uppotting. These are also prime candidates for root pruning. Small trees and shrubs typically need to be uppotted every 1 to 2 years until they reach the desired size. Once that desired size is reached, they can usually be maintained in the same pot by replacing the top layer of soil each year. All right, so now it's time to talk about Bootstrap Farmer's role in not only your seed starting, but your uppotting. For us, everything starts with the reason we're all here, the 1020 tray. That is the foundational piece for basically bottom watering and transporting around all of your seed starts. For you smaller gardeners out there or somebody doing more smaller batch stuff, we have the 1010. Same configuration, same food-safe polypropylene that's made in the USA. Both of these trays are very modular in that you can start your seeds in these and then move them up the uppotting process as you go along. In this video, we're primarily going to focus on the 1020 tray. The most common way to start seeds is in cell trays, all that fit inside the 1020, and we have whole configurations in 10, 72, 128, and 200 cell sizes. So these cell sizes are important because if you're doing a bunch of lettuce, a cell tray of 200 is a very economical way to start a bunch of lettuce all at one time. If you're a smaller gardener and just need to start a bunch of lettuce, but you know you're not going to be eating that much, a 50 cell count is a great option for you. The other thing Bootstrap Farmer has, in addition to cell trays, is air prune trays, currently in a 72 cell version. All of these air prunes are in our traditional colors of orange, pink, purple, green, blue, and black. It also fits inside the 1020 tray. For smaller growers and gardeners, the 6-cell air prune insert exactly fits 12 inserts inside of a 1020, which gives you 72 cells of growing. What differs this from either the 72 air prune tray or the 72 cell insert tray, it's much easier to color code and do small batch things of 6 tomatoes, 6 cabbage, 6 pepper plants, 6 lettuce plants, 6 romaine plants. Whatever color code makes the most sense to you. If you don't have a gigantic garden and you have a much smaller footprint, these are the perfect solution for you. So one thing you'll notice as we go along these different product lines is we're real big on colors at Bootstrap Farmer. Not only are they fun to be around, but they're perfect for on-farm and garden organization, plus a little bit of marketing advantage when you go to the farmer's market. Now, most of these you're going to see in our traditional colors of black, orange, purple, blue, green, and pink. But some of these specialty colors, like the different tans and blues and oranges and yellows. These are fun collections that we have with whispering willows and some more upcoming projects along the way. So now that you've started your seeds in these cell trays or these smaller stick cells, you can now move on to the 2.5 ounce cups. So it's about this stage of the game that we start getting a lot of questions about humidity domes. And it's really important to realize what a humidity dome does. And during the seed starting phase, it increases the soil temperature a little bit and increases the humidity needed to often crack the seed pods and to allow the seeds to sprout. So once you see the seeds have already started, it's time to remove the dome. Depending on the variety, that can be anywhere from 3 to 10 days, and the dome has done its job. Some people do sprout seeds in the smaller pots. The domes fit, and the domes also fit on the 3.3-inch pots. But it's often not necessary if we're uppotting, because once the seed goes in there and it's already sprouted, there's no need for a humidity dome at that point. The only time you would use it on these two pots is whenever you're planting seeds directly in here, which by and large doesn't make a lot of sense because of the space required to plant so few plants.
Our newest pot is our 3.3-inch pot. It's a step up from our 2.5. This pot is also great for taking to market with plants in it. It's also a standard 18 count, which you typically buy starter plants at the nursery. These pots also have a great insert that sits into our 10 by 20 trays. It's great for moving around your farm or to market so they don't fall out everywhere.
So again, moving up the line, we have the 5-inch pot, which is currently our biggest pot. This is perfect for tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplants, peppers, or any other large plant that may take a little bit longer to grow out, especially if you're starting those seeds earlier on in the season. And just like the 3.3, it has an insert to be able to take to market or out to the garden as you're moving plants in and out of the house from propagation. For small gardeners that aren't going to be planting in mass or bunch, this is a nice in-between from seed starting here to going either to a bigger pot directly in ground. So our very new 4-cell inserts, also with Air Prune technology, there's 8 inserts fit inside of a 1020 with 4 cells each, which gives you the same 32 count that our pots do, but in a smaller batch form, or if you're planting, let's say, 4 peppers, 4 tomatoes, different peppers, different cucumbers, just gives you a little bit of option in between this and the cups. Since 2015, Bootstrap Farmer has prided ourselves in giving farmers and gardeners the very best quality products that you can count on. These are all USA made. They all have a 2-year warranty against cracks and defects, so feel free to drop them and step on them as you go about your gardening activities and just kind of do that worry-free. If you like this video and what we're doing here recently, go ahead and like and subscribe. Let us know what you're doing in the comments, what you're gardening this year. That really helps us plan out content, and it also helps other farmers find you. So if you have any questions, go ahead and call 1-800-406-1982 or visit bootstrapfarmer.com. We're available by phone and email, and oftentimes we'll get Carrie on the line. So other than that, have a great day. Let us know what you're planting, and we'll see you in the next video.